things in the last days are set to take place in the not so distant future. Many things, ladies and gentlemen, end time watchmen. I want to talk to you about a few of these things. During the tribulation, multitudes from every nation will fight against each other. Brother against brother. Man's enemies of his own household. Governments will put the boots on the throat of the people. There will be many people that come to the Messiah at that time as well. Yeshua prophesied many things, and so did the prophets, of what's going to happen in the not so distant future. But he did promise us that even heaven and earth would pass away, but his word would not. He said his name would be great among the nations. He also said that many would call themselves Christ, or their religion would be that of Christ or Yeshua. He said there'd be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars. He said there'd be a lot of environmental devastation, the ravaging of the planet. Preparations are underway for a global war that's anticipated, and semi-global wars. He talked about sorceries and witchcraft and magic and occult practices and enchantments. We can see that in these days now. We saw in the book of Revelation about the epidemic of drug use, pharmakia. Talked about wicked people roaming across the face of the earth in the last days, which would be, in all reality, a global curse. Talked about the final destination of those type of people that are under Mystery Babylon. Talked about them having their final demise. Talks about this whore, this harlot, the queen of heaven, with a global counterfeit church where all denominations come together. The Bible warned us that there would be deception that would be accompanied or followed by great signs and wonders. Talked about a great move toward the apostasy that would occur. Talked about fallen angels interacting with mankind. There's an explosion of that taking place. It talked about substantial wealth and luxuries. James foresaw that. It's very interesting that so many people are either on one spectrum or the other. They're either filthy rich or they can barely pay their bills. Seems to be there's no in between anymore. But yet the vast material wealth and luxuries are they're going to disappear. If you don't believe me, go read Revelation 17 and 18. It was also prophesied that homosexuality would be flaunted and put in the face of the people that despise it, including the followers of Yeshua. And we know and realize and understand, if we go back and search history, we know the very root of it was pride and complacency in allowing the homosexuality to run rampant. It's prophesied that in the last days that there would be major slaughter of children. We see that taking place. It's prophesied in the last days that anyone that seeks out the true word, the Torah, the Gospels, the unveiling of Yeshua and the Revelation, that they would be hated by all mankind. You see that there would be an ecumenical rising of many so-called Christ or religions that are like him, such as those that celebrate Easter and Christmas and all these other pagan holidays. We see that on the rise. It's phenomenal just how big it's become in the last 40, 50 years. We see that how it was prophesied that humanity would become increasingly so materialistic and lovers of pleasure, and that adultery and divorce would be rampant, and people would be caught up in everything but their own family. Never in history has it ever been like this as it is today. Can you imagine this Hellenistic pleasure that is so available and has become such a multi-billion-dollar business to not only distract the worldly people but the so-called followers of Messiah? Talked about in the Word just how tremendous the rebellion of children would be against their parents. Talked about so much of prophecy talks about how the men will become lovers of their own selves. How many people put themselves above others today? Oh, many do. How many people put themselves above making sure the gospel of the kingdom goes out? How many people put themselves above prayer? How many people put themselves above fasting and encouraging others in the Word? When in fact the Messiah taught self-denial. But yet most churches and most people today, they want to be handed a feel good about yourself message rather than a get right with Yahweh message. See, the very signs and wonders movement that have went across this globe is literally trying to replace the word of Yahweh in Yeshua. See, I'm telling you, very seldom is marriage honorable anymore in the Word. And what I mean by that is people don't promote that marriage is honorable. In the Word they say that go ahead, the modern Christians say go ahead, divorce, do what you want to do. And therefore the kids suffer, the families suffer, and we wind up with a society like we have today. It's also prophesied by the Messiah that we would experience great earthquakes in many different places. Seismic activities are just like never before. You see it talked about that technology in the last days, the book of Daniel, and knowledge increasing. It talked about population explosion. Look at what's going on today. You got to understand that the word means business. You got to understand that it is not a game. You got to understand that it's prophesied that even birds of prey will eat the flesh of dead men. You got to understand many millions won't even be buried, but the vultures and the eagles and everything else will be eating them. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to understand something. You've got to understand something, that there is terrible times ahead. Terrible times are ahead. We must understand that it is very important that we examine ourselves. We must understand it's very important that we go back and read the whole book, not parts of it. We must understand that it is very, 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 very important that great signs are coming from heaven. We must understand that the sun's going to scorch inhabitants of the earth. We must understand that famines are going to become so common in America. They're common all over except for this stinking place called America. About 1 billion people, 1.5 billion people went hungry this past year, but not the Americans. They will see no sorrow. They will not become a widow, you see. But you got to understand that a final generation will be open to receiving the mark of the beast, because they consider themselves as having to be obedient to a secular government no matter what, because they've been taught that in the so-called Christian church. The Messiah foretold fearful things, men's hearts failing them, looking after those things coming upon the earth. The Messiah taught that ethnic conflicts and kingdom against kingdom and a police state would rise up and begin to destroy everything that is good. You got to understand that places will be burning up. You got to understand that this is not a game. You got to understand that this is truth, And you got to understand it is not a game. You got to understand the global government is right here. You got to understand that chaotic weather is everywhere. You got to understand that wars in the Middle East will become normal, and war in America and slaughter will become normal. You got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, you got to understand that the book, the word, the Holy Writ is not a game. It is not something to be played with. It is not something that you can do when you want to do. It is not something that you can pick up and put down whenever you feel like it. It is not something that you yourself will be able to pick and choose what will come to pass and what will not come to pass. The only thing you can pick and choose, is to serve Him in spirit and truth. That's the only thing you can do. Listen to this. You're going to be hearing this on the streets. This is going to be in the houses. It's going to be everywhere. Everywhere. The sound of war and slaughter.